Guys, today we're going to be learning about the election of 1868. These are your video goals. By the end, you should be able to tell me who the two candidates were and what they stood for. You should be able to tell me which groups supported each political party. You should be able to tell me about the tactics used by politicians during the election of 1868. And you should be able to explain why Grant was able to win and what the results of the election meant. By 1868, it is definitely time for a new president. Andrew Johnson has been president for almost 4 years, and he has been impeached by Congress, but he was not convicted. That is, he was not found guilty of breaking any crime, and he was allowed to remain president. But even though he remains president, he is unpopular and ineffective. So it's almost as if the country doesn't really have a president until 1868, when the next presidential election occurs. And people are hopeful for better leadership to come. But as you will see, their hopes will be disappointed. The two candidates are Ulysses S. Grant, who runs as a Republican, and Horatio Seymour. Ulysses S. Grant was very popular because many people believed that he was the reason that the North won the war. But even though he was a good general, he was an inexperienced politician, and he would turn out to not be a very good president. Horatio Seymour was a relatively unknown governor of New York, and he was going up against Grant, even though Grant had the amazing reputation of having saved the Union. Let's talk a little bit about the main issues and who supported which party. So the main issues in the election had to do with Reconstruction of the South and also monetary and economic policies that would favor either the wealthy or the poor farmers. So Grant and the Republicans believed in continuing Reconstruction. Specifically, they wanted to continue congressional Reconstruction, where they would send the military down to the South to basically force the South to change. On top of this, the Republicans wanted to pass policies that would help wealthy eastern cities, but that would make life harder for a lot of poor farmers, especially out west. Seymour and the Democrats stand for the opposite things. Seymour wants to end Reconstruction and basically let the South do its thing. And they want to pass policies that will be better off for poor farmers, but that will not help the wealthy Easterners as much. The main supporters for the Republican Party were people who lived in the urban Northeast and also out in the Midwest. And very importantly, Southern African Americans who were this was the first election they were allowed to vote in. They were strong supporters of Grant, and almost all of them vote for Grant in the election. Seymour and the Democrats attract lots of support from white Southerners who want to be left alone to reconstruct the South on their own terms. And they are also very popular among immigrants in big cities. During this election, people avoid talking about real issues and instead make emotional appeals to get votes. One of the most famous ways was something called waving the bloody shirt, and there's a cartoon making fun of this right there. And so waving the bloody shirt was a tactic used by politicians where instead of talking about real issues, they would just talk about the Civil War. So they would wave this shirt around and talk about, how hard the war was and how hard the North fought and what they did during the war, instead of actually talking about the real issues that mattered. And in this way, they could win support from Civil War veterans and other stuff like that. Another famous motto was vote as you shot. And this was a Republican slogan which appealed to Civil War veterans, which basically tried to make the Republicans look like the good guys. Remember, Lincoln was a Republican. And it makes the Democrats seem like they were the enemy, because after all, the North wasn't shooting at Democrats, they were shooting at Confederates. But this slogan sort of confuses that. So both of these tactics rely on appealing to people's emotions and memories of the war rather than talking about real issues. The election was actually really very close, even though if you look at that map there with the electoral votes, it doesn't seem very close. But in terms of popular vote, it was only 300,000 votes difference. It was 3 million votes for Grant, who wins, to 2,700,000 votes for Seymour. And we can learn a lot by looking a little bit more at these numbers. These numbers tell us that Grant was only able to win because 3 southern states who probably would have voted Democrat were not yet allowed back into the Union, so they were excluded, and also because 500,000 Southern African Americans were allowed to vote this time, and they all voted, or they mostly voted for Grant. And so it's only because of radical Reconstruction that Grant is able to win the White House. And so what this means is that the Republicans are going to need to keep Reconstruction going, and they're going to need to keep control of the South, maybe even militarily, if they're going to want to hold on to the presidency. And we'll see later how this affects future elections. So that's it for today. A nice short video for you all. Here are your questions again. Make sure you can answer these by tomorrow. Thanks. I'll see you guys then.